films based on true stories are always going to be difficult because they can either go one way or another. They can either be really realistic and emotive and hard to watch and difficult to watch, but in a positive way, or they can just be really bad and really offensive and, a really bad portrayal of true events. Murder in Greenwich is kind of in the middle, which is weird because I feel like the narrative style is really bad, but the actual story itself is very interesting and obviously very awful. The film was released in 2002, directed by Tom McLoughlin, and the screenplay is by Dave Erickson, based on the book by Mark Fuhrman. And this tells the story of Martha Moxley, who was 15 when she was murdered in Greenwich in the 1970s, and her murder is unsolved for 25 years. And that's Greenwich in Connecticut, by the way, not Greenwich in London, as I initially thought when I first discovered this film. And this film looks at, what was known at the time, what could have happened, and it's told through the perspective of Mark Fuhrman, who is a former LA detective, with an interesting backstory that relates to O.J. Simpson. Very interesting character to drive this forward. Obviously, it's based on his book. He is played here by Christopher Meloni, and Martha Moxley is played by Maggie Grace. Now, Martha Moxley is a character in this, even though she's not alive. And I have to say that narrative style, giving her a voice, feels really awful. And I don't want to say that she doesn't deserve a voice, but because I don't ever think somebody who has been murdered should be played by an actor and given a voice, because it's not their voice. And it's not fair to just assume what they would be thinking. This is obviously a very spiritual thing. If you're not a spiritual person, then maybe you won't get it. But to me, as a spiritualist, Martha Moxley in spirit will have thoughts on what happened to her and her murder and the way it's been treated over the last several decades. So for me, the narrative style was very uncomfortable, and I felt like it was unnecessary. Yes, we need to know who Martha was as a person, but that, given her a narrative, a point of view, is uncomfortable, and it feels, I don't want to say it feels offensive to her memory, but I just don't like it when people put words into somebody's mouth when they're no longer with us. Like when somebody does a hologram at a live music festival of a musician who's no longer here. Completely disrespectful, and I think that is quite disrespectful. I don't know what any of Martha Moxley's family descendants, she wouldn't have direct descendants, but her relatives think of this. I don't know, maybe they were for it. I can see the argument of giving her a voice, but I feel like it's offensive and disrespectful to put words into her mouth, unless it was a direct quote from a diary or something, which I don't ever believe it was at any point. It tries to be an interesting story, and certainly it is. It's an interesting story. It tries to tell it in a way that's too interesting and too creative. It tries to be something spectacular, and there's too much choppiness, trying to make it fancy editing, going back and forth. As I said, the voice-over narrative of Martha Moxley is just uncomfortable, but it's interesting. So if you don't know the story, then it's definitely worth checking out to kind of find out more. I'm not sure how 100% factually correct it is, but I'd say from what I've never read anything that says it's not realistic, so I'm assuming that it's for the most part true to the events at the time and what happened, or what was believed to have happened. It's interesting enough. It's not impossible to watch. It's not what I'd hoped for. I'd hoped for something a bit more, I guess, tasteful. Part of it just feels really inappropriate. I don't know what it is about this character. I've got to say she's well played by Maggie Grace. No problems with the actual acting. I just think it was a poor choice for this narrative. Interesting story. Could have been told much more interestingly, much more engagingly, and a bit more sensitively, but probably still worth the watch if you like true crime, because it's not all bad.